Welcome to this next episode of the Assistant Lab, and we're delighted to welcome back the fabulous Anel Martin. But joining us for this week's interview is a fabulous woman called Mairi McHaffie. Mairi is co-founder and director of a company called SceneChange, who do a lot of work in the diversity and inclusion space, and actually she does come from a part assistant background as well. She actually started off her career being an actor, of something of which she still is and still is passionate about, but in between some acting roles she did undertake an assistant role at the UK Civil Service. So we learn all about that, and before talking about actually the work she's been doing for quite a while now, with lots of top organisations across the UK and globally. And we talk through things like managing upwards, but in terms of leadership, pastoral leadership, the inclusion shadow, human-centred leadership, and some top tips on personal impact and confidence and how to cultivate that as an assistant. We cover an incredible amount during this session. I think if you're an assistant that's looking to up your game, get that mojo back, get more excited about the role, want to really harness your communications going forward, then this is definitely an episode you need to listen to. So enjoy. Well, good morning and welcome to this next episode of the Assistant Lab. And I'm really super excited because Anel's back. This is her first episode since the big move. So very quickly, how did the big move go, Anel? All happy, settled?
All happy. I wouldn't say 100% settled, but definitely getting there.
Well, it's super great to have you back, and also especially great that we are both connected to this wonderful woman, Mairi McHaffie, who I was thinking about this the other day. Mairi, I actually saw you speak for We Are the City at an evening event, and I think it was between 8 and 9 years ago. I don't want to make anyone feel like old on this podcast, but you did a really fabulous session that evening, because I came with some of my colleagues from Hayes at the time, and it was around body language and communication and how to convey those messages across. So it's really nice all these years later to be reconnected to you.
And then the funny thing is, I was probably wearing a red dress.
Yeah, you were.
So that you're not going, still wearing that red dress 9 years later. I do have several red dresses. It's kind of like, it's my personal brand of confidence. So
signature.
I hope it's not the same one.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this session, because you've had an extraordinary background, and I know you're going to tell us about that, but you have actually been a PA yourself as well, and that wasn't the main reason we invited you on. We just actually, some of what you're an expert at really translates into our profession and some of the challenges we're trying to work through at the moment. So thank you. So something we always do, and now I love to take people back to the 16-year-old self. So kind of what happened back then when you were coming out of the education system, and what did you want to be, and did that happen?
Yeah, so I'm from Glasgow originally. I've been in London for half my life now. I guess you could call me a Londoner now. And I was at school until I was 18, and for me, all the way through school, ever since I was very young, I wanted to be an actor. That was my, real drive in life. I don't come from a theatrical background at all. My dad was a teacher. My mum worked in education as a secretary. But I had gone to sort of little drama classes, ever since I knew that there were some, and I was encouraged to go to them. So for me, it was about going to drama school. So when I left at 18, that's what I did. I went to the Royal Scottish Academy, which is now the Royal Conservatoire. And I went off to do the degree course in drama. And after that, I got a job spraying perfume on people in a department store. Many of us have had those jobs. Just, would you like a spray, sir? All of those kind of things. And in between that time, I was kind of working out how I could get into TV. And I got a job working for a TV show that was being filmed in Edinburgh, and they needed somebody to look after the kids and take them to the toilet. They had the audience of kids, and that's where I started to kind of go, I'd quite like to go into TV presenting, and really watched what was happening in the studio and put together a show reel and sent that to everyone. literally watching daytime TV and quickly copying down who the producers were, because we didn't have the internet then. You know, you could just look stuff up. And that got me a job at BBC Scotland, and that's where it all kind of started, really.
And I know you did dramatics or some sort of theatre.
Yeah, also studied drama, and it's actually amazing how it sets you up for so many different things in your life. You know, I always say to people, having that background, you know, you interview like an absolute legend because you have the right mindset. There's so many skills that are translatable. So I do think it also gave me a very good grounding for what I ended up doing, and was also quite useful to me as an assistant, being able to read people's body language, being able to pick up on the subtext in a meeting, you know. So people always say, that's not a practical skill. What are you ever going to do with that? But I have actually found it massively useful in my career.
Hugely, and I'm similar to you as well, Anel, because I did TV presenting for a number of years, moved to London, did a bit of theatre, bits of films, and of course, well, you know yourself, I mean, I think everybody knows, you know, being an actor is not necessarily always going to bring the money in, unless you're on, you know, a TV show constantly. So that's when I ended up going to a temping agency, and I was waitressing actually, and somebody said, well, why don't you try temping? I didn't even know what temping was. And I did various jobs, and then ended up becoming a PA in the civil service in the UK, working for somebody who really valued the fact that I had the drama background. The first kind of role I had was not only to be the senior leader's PA, a woman, but also to read documents for a blind gentleman who was working in her team. And I think they kind of looked at my CV and went, oh, she's an actor, she'll be able to read. You know, that she might make it sound a bit more interesting. And that's where that all started. And I actually worked with that leader, going around different divisions within her department for several years, going off and, you know, doing a bit of acting here and there, and then coming back and coming back to that role.
Do you think, I mean, obviously you will both know better than me, but my assumptions of the acting industry, and I know quite a lot of kind of, I say celebrity assistants, those that have supported actors and actresses and what have you, but it does seem quite brutal at times. Like you have to build up quite a lot of resilience, don't you, with the knockbacks and the rejections, and it's not as linear to get up that path as much as it is an assistant. Do you think that has stood you both in good stead?
And I think you've touched on a very interesting point. When you are auditioning, sometimes they are looking for a short blonde girl, okay? I think you also sort of become desensitized. Rejection goes through a lens of, I'm not what they're looking for today. So I think that, again, was very useful to me in my career. When I go into an interview, you are very realistic about what you are and what you can offer, but I don't think it hurts quite as much because of that experience of having auditioned and understanding from their point of view. It's not a personal reflection on me. I'm just not what they're looking for today. And I don't know if Mary, if you agree with that.
Yeah, and I would have been on the opposite casting day to yourself, Anel, because I'm almost 6 foot tall. So I'm in that bracket. Yeah, absolutely. You have to, because, you know, at the end of the day, whoever is auditioning is looking for a team of people that are going to work well together, that also look right together. I mean, this is another thing that you do have to kind of be aware that physically you might not fit in. So, you know, which is another layer to, you know, regular jobs, although I know we're going to talk about unconscious bias and so on, perhaps in this chat that we're having. But yeah, it's hugely important in terms of, yeah, that confidence, being able to talk to people, also being able to empathize and put yourself in the other person's shoes and kind of think, well, actually, what is the need of this person and can I provide that? And that goes across being a PA and an EA as well.
Definitely.
And did you find, I'm just really curious, the assistant part of your career, was it quite tough working in the civil service as an assistant?
Well, the thing for me is, and I think what really helped was because I wasn't a permanent member of staff, when I went in with kind of eyes wide open, I didn't need to be, you know, political in the sense of, you know, worrying about what, you know, who I was speaking to and, you know, what allies I was making. And I got on very well with the leader. And in those days, you know, they even had their own office. So we would shut the door sometimes after me taking minutes, and I would go, oh, well, it's so obvious who doesn't like each other in that meeting. And, you know, if you expect me to take minutes of these meetings, you're going to have to work in your communication style. So we had a bit of a laugh about it. And actually, she was one of these people, and I think we all ought to have this in ourselves, who's really encouraging of people's strengths, not just, you know, how are you working for me and my team, but actually, let's see what else you've got and encourage that and unpick it and support it. And she started to say, well, fine then, if that's the way you feel, you're an actor, why don't you start doing presentation skills with us? And I really, at that time, I didn't have the confidence. I kind of backed off and said, well, I don't know how to speak to business people. I don't know how to speak to civil servants. I know nothing about politics. But she kept pushing and saying, well, but you're a people person. It's nothing to do with knowing about politics. You've been moaning about communication skills. Isn't that what you do? And that's actually where everything started. It was through her who had said, you know, why don't we start with the team? And I started bringing what I knew as an actor, as a TV presenter, having been at drama school, and bringing that to the team, and it was a big success. And that's when I started to go, oh, hang on a minute, this is something that I can do. It's using my skills in a different way.
That's fascinating. Yeah. So when did that lead you then to set up SceneChange? Was that when you decided to become a businesswoman and come out of the civil service?
Yeah, it's funny because I always wanted to be an actor. My mum used to say, well, you know, what if it doesn't work out? You know, you need to have a backup plan. And I remember thinking I'd like to be a businesswoman. Not that I knew anything about business or even had a business idea, but I liked the thought of being an executive and wearing a nice dress, maybe having a briefcase, maybe having my hair a bit like this, and, you know, flying all over the world, being an executive. So that was part of it. So yes, it started because we started to look into how people were using drama skills in business. And again, we found out within that department that there was a tender coming up where people had been providing role players for development centres for managers. And we basically set up SceneChange overnight and then said, look, we've been doing this for years, and went, I mean, we had for other people, but, you know, just hadn't done it through SceneChange, and we got that contract and basically started providing role players. And that's kind of what we do now. We do the learning and the development, do lots of workshops, behavioural skills, and also work with actors.
Yeah, which obviously we've been privy to, and it's amazing.
You know, I think there's something so important about understanding communication theoretically and using those role players. It is a completely different discipline when you get to test these skills against a real person. And I do think it sticks. So, you know, knowing what to do is different than actually doing it, and doing it in a situation that isn't high risk. So I do think that that is something that a lot of companies and organizations should be tapping into.
Yeah, and you've hit it right on the head there, Anel. It's what we call behavioural flexibility. Is, you know, we cannot change the other person that we're speaking to, or we're giving feedback to, or we're developing or managing, and that goes for managing upwards as well. You can't change them, but by flexing your own style and changing some of your own behaviours, yes, being your authentic self, but actually thinking about, you know, well, what's the impact of this? What's the desire of the impact of my communication? What I want the other person to do, we can then start to play around with how we communicate. And that's hugely powerful. And the more that we do it and the more we practice these skills, the better we become at it. I mean, I was working with a team of very senior leaders last week. I was over in Frankfurt, and we were just doing feedback. We were talking about giving feedback because, of course, we've had end of year, you know, reviews, and a lot of, not just the person who's receiving feedback gets nervous about it, the people that are giving the feedback also think, you know, I want this to be successful, I'm not quite sure how to do it. And even some small things such as the language that we use. the delivery that we use with the other person can have a massive impact on whether that person's going to walk away feeling deflated or whether they're going to go, I've just had a growth conversation. This is great. I can use this.
Absolutely. And you know, the brain is so slanted towards the negative feedback that you even if your executive gives you 10 positive things, you remember the one piece of criticism. So it's so easy for that discussion to go sideways. And it's wonderful to know that you know, you've got executives who are interested in lifting their game when it comes to the feedback. You know, that it's not just you preparing for that feedback, but somebody else is also concerned about the process.
Absolutely. And I'll give you a top tip here, actually. And it's just a bit of language that when we are giving feedback about anything, it might be, you know, oh, Vix, I saw your presentation yesterday. I thought it was really amazing. I really liked how you handled those questions. But can I just give you some feedback about some of your delivery style? What happens usually is Vix is going, oh, it's great. She really liked my presentation. As soon as you hear that word, but, you forget about everything and you just focus on what the problem might have been. So if you can, and this is a challenge for people, to just eradicate that word but and change it to and. So Vix, I saw your presentation yesterday. I thought it was really great. Great how you handled those challenges. And let's look at some of the delivery style that we can build on to make it even better. It's a completely different message.
That's
so
game changing. Yeah.
Game changing. So even when you're writing an email, it could be to a client, could be to your boss, to, you know, a member of the team. If you see that word but coming up, you can go, oh, could I change that for an and? Could I swap it and then reread that message? So there's your challenge for the next couple of days. Whoever's watching.
I love that. I love that.
I do.
You know,
so
you touched on something quite interesting, Mary. You mentioned, you know, being able to adjust your communication style to the person that you're delivering to. Now, traditionally, assistants often feel I need to adjust to my executive's communication style. You very seldom get to really stand in your own communication style. So we have to be quite flexible because of the different people we work with, but you sort of do feel their conflict style and their communication style reign supreme. Are there any tips on how you can sort of level the playing field and be more of your authentic self in a situation where that power dynamic is so different?
Do you know, it's funny, the role of the EA and the P is so important, so critical to effective teams. And yes, of course, you may have, you know, the leader of that team with one particular style, but certainly what I noticed was when I was a PA, that people would come to me with all their challenges. They would come to me with some ideas. They wouldn't necessarily go to the boss, but they would come to me. So it put me in a position of becoming a trusted advisor. And, you know, there's a whole load of science around that, whole lot of workshops we can do about how you become a trusted advisor, and we do them. But it's that role of understanding that you're often, you know, you've got a foot in both camps, and you've got a real opportunity to almost get into pastoral leadership in terms of, you know, how do you take care of the team? How do you understand how they're operating and what the challenges are that you can maybe feed back to the leader? And it's also, again, it's about positioning that empathy of what does that leader need to be successful? What are the sort of top 3 things that they're really looking for? What does the team need to be successful? And can I join the dots? So I think it is important to be able to flex your style. You're going to have somebody possibly very junior that might come to you that maybe, you know, hasn't got the language or the confidence. You have to sort of remember, God, remember when I was like that when I first, you know, got my first job. And the leaders that may be super stressed and may occasionally bark things out people is actually, how do you filter that down? How do you make that message softer so that people can be successful as a team?
You've touched on a very important thing, Mary. I think often we act as shock absorbers between, you know, between different individuals, and often, you know, having to almost sanitize a message or, you know, panel beat a message so that it translates. You can't always repeat verbatim, but you can be that bridge, or you can, if you know your executive very well, explain something to somebody else, an instruction, because the experience you have listening to them you know what they want, and you know in their heads what the picture is. So you often almost fall into the role of a translator to somebody who doesn't have that much exposure to that person.
I love that. I love that role of the translator. Absolutely. I mean, sometimes it may be that, you know, you don't have all the information, or you're not a specialist in whatever the specialist subject of the leader is, but you have to be a specialist in communication and translation. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I'm just really nosy. So obviously your work around behaviours and communication, has some of that training and that L&D, has that had to be tailored since the pandemic? Like, what are the challenges facing companies since the pandemic, and now we've sort of come out of it and we're in this recession cost of living thing? Has some of it changed, and like, is it more challenging for businesses now, or has it got easier with all this technology? Or, I mean, if you had to tailor some of the training you do to counteract that. And the other caveat to that is we've actually got 4 generations in the workforce now, which we've never had before. So we've got that going on in the background as well. I'm just curious about your thoughts on what's happened kind of since the pandemic.
Yeah, a lot of the work that we are doing is really about building and managing effective teams, because as we continue to work in these hybrid environments, you're going to have, you know, new joiners, graduates, or people that, you know, first job are coming in. You've got, you know, a more mature generation that are sort of thinking about their succession planning. Many of us are still working in these boxes. There are people that have never physically met that have joined organizations. So for us, and the conversations that we're having is how do we maintain these effective teams? What is it that people need? And what it really comes down to is it comes down to that leadership culture of inclusion. And everything that we do has a focus on inclusion. If people don't feel included, if they don't feel psychologically safe, then they're not able to grow. They're not able to feel that they're being nurtured and actually explore the skills and the capabilities that they might have. They tend to shut down. And it's harder to have that feeling of safety if we're not together. I mean, in the olden days, you know, we would meet each other in the kitchen, you know, you're making a cup of tea. Even people that you don't necessarily work with every day, you would start to build these little micro relationships. Or it might be that walk from the elevator. You know, you'd even get to know the clients better, which helps you to inform the team and helps you to inform your boss. So it's creating more spaces for people to be more human, and also to understand the challenges that they're going through. And that comes down to the culture of the leader. And I would also say the PA and the EA to start to make people feel safe about talking about, you know, what they need, and, you know, what they can do without. And that's self-disclosure.
So Mairi, just tying into that, do you think the loss of body language, you know, when we talk on Zoom in the little box, you only see a little bit of my face, you might see a bit of my hands. Do you think the loss of body language has impacted that bonding experience? Because we're still talking to each other. What do you think is the missing elements?
I think it's about, certainly about awareness. Everything's about awareness. So when I'm on Zoom calls, you know, if I'm really wanting to get my message across, and I'm sure most of us know this by now, but you know, I'll be talking right down that lens. It may just be maybe at the beginning of the meeting, you know, I'm doing it right now. I'm not actually looking at your faces, but the connection that I'm possibly having with you feels more like a normal conversation because we're looking at each other. So it could be even at that, you're just welcoming people to the meeting. You're making that eye contact. And then, of course, when they're speaking, you start to look at their faces and reading their faces. But those really important messages need to be down the lens. I mean, as you can see, I'm very expressive, wearing a red dress and waving my hands around. It's also about making it a bit more exciting for people to feel that, you know, this is an exciting project. This is something that I want to be part of. And I'm also all about the power of costume. I will never turn up to work, even in my spare room, unless I'm fully dressed with a red lipstick on. That's me, but there's a lot of science around that as well about, you know, how we show up for ourselves can really affect how we operate and affect our confidence and our energy.
I wondered, you know, we've been doing a lot on in our profession of late, and frankly, I've never seen this. I mean, as you both know, I've just hit 40 and I've been in this profession since I was 16. I've never seen the lack of confidence levels at all in those 24 years as I've seen in recent years. Like, yeah, we know the challenges and we can get Devil Wears Prada type bosses, but to see this happen in our profession, I don't think the lockdowns did our profession much favours, to be honest with you. And I mean, it even goes down to when I was training assistants at the beginning, I'd see them on camera, they'd happily come on, they'd still be sort of dressed as though they were going to the corporate world or dressed at all. And then you ended up at the back end of the lockdowns, they wouldn't even come on camera. And then I'd get a message afterwards saying, Vic, I haven't got dressed, I haven't done my hair, I haven't cleaned my teeth. Now, that sort of stuff doesn't matter to me when I'm training a group of assistants, but I kind of, when I've looked at how part of the profession's diminished over the last couple of years, and then the lack of confidence, you know, tapping into what you were just saying, Marion, about that science, I wonder if that has played into a piece of it, because your average assistant, even in the more colourful sectors where you could be a little bit more laid back, everybody had some sort of uniform going in.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, from my perspective, it is so important how you show up for yourself. I also think more of what you're doing within, you know, your association is super important, because people are learning from each other. They're sharing, they're starting to go, oh, I have those challenges too. That's great. It's not just me. I'm not going mad. That ability to have conversational turn taking as well, and understand that, you know, it's not just about the job, it's actually about people's wellness. And I know lots of organizations, many of them are really investing in wellness and investing in mental health. And I think that does help and should continue to grow. And it is definitely more important that we're having those times when it's not just talking about work, that we're actually getting to know people on a personal level, find out their strengths, that help with confidence as well. Because yeah, I see it all the time in my work. I work with graduates sometimes, and you know, they're turning up and, you know, get the hoodie on, you know, and the light off. I mean, they've turned up on the camera, they've done what I've asked, but you kind of go, okay, right. Then we have to look at what impact are you making? What impact do you want to make? So there's a whole lot of self-reflection that needs to be part of that. I'm just not feeling confident. That's why I'm wearing my hoodie and I'm turning my camera off. Is actually what chances can I give to myself? And I say this to my own children is, you know, you have to be your own BFF, and you have to get out. There's going to be so many people in the world that are going to get in your way to succeed. Please don't be one of them. You know?
Absolutely. And I do think how much of, you know, the bad behavior on camera and, you know, not dressing up for those meetings, how much do you think is down to real Zoom fatigue? Because we have been doing this for many, many, many months now.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is to do with that. I think it's also the role of, you know, we do learn from other people. We're visual learners mostly. So if everybody else is in the team is kind of dwindling down into, I'll just wear my pajamas, then, you know, it's very hard to have the motivation to not go down that route, because we're pack, you know, animals. So if everybody else's uniform is, I'm going to wear the pajamas, you start doing that as well. Yeah. So I think there needs to, and again, I think this is the role of the PA and the EA is to just kind of think, well, what behaviors can I be role modeling? Because I'm the one that's often doing a lot of the talking, because I'm introducing people, I'm managing the tech, you know, I'm bringing in the clients. What am I doing to sort of lift the spirits of other people in the team?
Well, I'm not going to lie, I never do on this podcast, but certainly at the earlier stages of the pandemic, I found it hard as a trainer to be on camera, because I was suddenly having to work at a supermarket through the night and then come straight home to run my business with no sleep. There was no amount of makeup or anything that was going to hide how exhausted I was. And I was very conscious of that, because I had such a corporate brand before the pandemic. I mean, a lot of PAs have actually said this to me, you know, we've seen you get up on stage in your corporate dresses and your high heels, your perfect hair. And then I go down to looking completely diminished. But then I realised it wasn't actually helping my exhaustion level. So I really had to work hard to go back to some of what I did before, to get some of that old me back, because the lockdowns were just going on, and it didn't feel like it was ever going to end. But, you know, I had to face reality. I was working nights and days with about 2 to 3 hours sleep a day, and I just had to make the best of that. But I'm wondering now, off the back of this conversation, whether some of the EPA members started doing that, because I was. But they weren't working at supermarkets through the night, so there was no excuse.
We can't all be perfect all the time.
No.
I'm definitely not advocating that we should all be turning up wearing a tiara, and you know, even though, you know, we've just been crying. I mean, you know, there's a place for fake it till you make it, or fake it till you become it. But there's also, you know, there's that level of self-care as well, that, you know, sometimes enough is enough. You know, I've managed to get out of bed and do this, get the kids to school, you know, walk the dog, whatever it is, and still show up. So we do have to cut ourselves a break as well. Yeah,
definitely. I think looking back at that, 100%. So another area that you're quite an expert on, and which keeps rearing its head in the UK, is unconscious bias. So now I'm not sure how SA tackles unconscious bias, but it was such a big, and it still is such a big subject area in terms of learning and development. But then you get like these wild announcements. So just before the pandemic, the UK government was like, right, we're banning unconscious bias training across Whitehall because it's a waste of time. And then there was a massive debate in the, you know, the industry and press and all that. And then obviously we've had Prince Harry's book recently come out, Spare, and I won't go into the details of that, but he did talk about unconscious bias in the interview, and what he said then rattled some cages and upset quite a few people, and others agreed with him. I guess my big question to you, Mairi, is unconscious bias still relevant training? Is there still much work to be done in that area? Because I think, yes, it is, in my opinion, but obviously that's just my opinion.
Yeah, huge amounts, and we still get asked for unconscious bias training, and I do have conversations with companies going, you know, this is what's happened across the UK government, because we also work with the civil service as well. Basically, it was a report that was commissioned by the Government Equalities Office that said that there's no particular evidence that unconscious bias training changes behaviour in the long term. However, what is not said, it also states that there's clearly a role for training to support a more inclusive workplace. So this is where when we speak to clients and say, we need unconscious bias training, everybody's talking about that, why aren't we doing it? Then I have a deeper conversation and say, well, you know, what is it about unconscious bias that you're interested in? And we can bring that in because we want to talk about how our brains operate, because we all have biases, it's normal. But it's about the bringing it to awareness that can make a difference. And if we can bring in unconscious bias through the lens of inclusion, this is actually where we start to make big steps. So what we do is and I know that you've been involved with us, Vix, on the training that we do on respectful behaviours. How does language affect, or body language affect, how people feel in teams? You know, are we constantly giving work to the same type of person because they're just like me, or because it's easier for me to communicate with that person because we get each other? Therefore, those that are not included in that become excluded. And we've all been in situations like that, whether it's at school or whether it's in jobs, where you really know that you're not part of that little group. So it's hugely important to understand, you know, yes, we have the biases. They all started because when we were crawling out of the caves, we were faced with another individual, and we had to decide very quickly, is this person going to join my tribe, make me stronger, or I'm going to have to fight this person because, you know, I'm in danger? And it's that fight or flight. So it's about using unconscious bias as a tool to really unpack and start to build cultures of inclusion, starting with yourself and then spreading that out towards the team and the whole organization.
So Mairi, just to tie into that question, if I'm in an organization, how do I know that we might need some unconscious bias training? What would be the warning signs? What would be the red flags that I'm looking at, which then points to we need this type of training, this type of intervention?
Well, when a client comes to us and say we think we might need this, the first thing I do is look at their website, and I look at who we are, and then I look at all the faces. And of course, we don't know where people's backgrounds are coming from, or what's going on in terms physically, how they're showing up. But often you will see a similarity of faces in terms of maybe culture or ethnicity, and you start to go, okay, right. Well, there's something that we can start looking at in terms of, how are we attracting a diversity of people and backgrounds to our organization? If I can't see it, I might go, well, I might not go there because I probably won't get the job. So therefore, you're starting to marginalize potential talent that could be coming in. So that's one of the first things that we look at. We also look at the levels of promotions, who's getting promoted, are women getting promoted as much as men? What happens if you're taking time out, if you're having a family, for both women and men? Is there a bias there? Is there a sort of shelf that people are finding it hard to get beyond? Looking at the ages of people, also looking at the language that they use in their websites, and also have they got an inclusion and belonging policy on the website, and is it front and central, or is it hidden right underneath, a bit more about us? Those are the kind of things that I would start to kind of go, you're not taking this seriously, and actually you're doing yourself a disservice. There's a whole load of research out there as well, that the more inclusive an organization is and the more diversity they have across the organization, the better and the more profitable they are. I mean, it's a no-brainer.
I think you make an incredibly good point. If everyone around the table agrees with you, the old saying goes, then 9 of those 10 people aren't needed. I think when you have multiple ideas, multiple points of view, different life experiences, your solutions are better, you will be more innovative, you will be more creative. And that seems to be a buzzword now. People want organizations that innovate, they want creative people in their teams. But if we are all carbon copies of each other, there is less room for that. There's less texture and depth.
Absolutely. And it's also about looking at we do an exercise saying, just look at your own friendship groups, the people that are closest to you. Okay, fine. Lots of us have got friends that we grew up with, and that's, just by default is people you went to school with or that grew up in your town. But if you look at the people that you trust at work, are they all the same? Are they very similar to you? And actually, it's been a game changer for me to really think about actively seeking out diversity of backgrounds and thoughts. So if I'm having a personal problem or a challenge, I will not necessarily nowadays go to my emotional friends that will be very happy to open a bottle of wine and cry about it and get, very dramatic about everything. Because often it doesn't actually lead to any solutions. It's just, we really like talking about it. So I have some friends who are super analytical. One is a mortgage advisor, the other one is a solicitor, and very factual women and brilliant friendships. But they will just go, okay, right, what's the challenge? Right, okay, what do you want to get out of it? Great. Okay, what steps have you already taken? So what they do is take all the emotion away and actually help me to solve the problems. And so if you start to kind of look at that, then you start to go, this is great. This whole difference around us can actually, it's like raising, they talk about it takes a village to raise a child. Well, actually, it takes a village of people to help you to be successful as well.
You've just it's made me think actually of when you were talking about amongst your friends and your personal circles. I mean, that's something that really hit home to me quite early on when I was a late teen, actually, when I started working in the city. And obviously I live in a very rural part of Dorset now, and frankly we need to hire SceneChange to come and train people in this village. The rose tinted glasses off, aesthetically it's very beautiful around here, but I'm not used to being in a place where my immediate circle, everybody's exactly the same. I'm not used to that. And, I'm the daughter of a gay man. I haven't been, that part of my upbringing wasn't like that. So to come into an area where I have heard racist and homophobic connotations, and it's just coming off the tongue, like easy as anything, it's been something I've struggled with in Dorset, and I've really noticed it. I first said it to my husband about 3 months ago, and I was like, wow, like just on a dog walk, and I'm hearing words that I'm not used to hearing.
Not for polite company.
Yeah, and then I I was having a discussion with a local councillor, and she's been a local parish councillor for donkey's years, very set in her ways. And obviously we're two completely different generations as well. And I do try and bear that in mind. And we're kind of going back and forth. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to win this argument. But she said, you shouldn't even be here anyway. We don't want people like you. You're from London. You're too young. This should be a place for people of a certain age. And we don't want people from London here. And that's just the way it came out. And I was like, wow, they need some training in this village. Like serious training. But it was just because I've been in London for so much of my life, and big cities or big towns. It's not that I was like naive to the sorts of stuff that goes on in other parts of the UK. It's just in this day and age, with all the education and everything that's out there, it just reminds me that there is still a lot of education to give.
Absolutely. And thankfully, I mean, I've got two boys. One is about to be 14, the other one's about to turn 11. You know, so still one in primary school and even early years of secondary. The education system is throwing everything at this. So we are lucky that these new generations of, you know, young people coming through, they're all over this and they own it. And, you know, fortunately, unfortunately, we do live in a diverse society. So you're going to get diversity of opinions, including the ones that maybe we don't agree with. But certainly education is taking this by the horns. I mean, my 10-year-old is constantly going, Mummy, that's a bit sexist. You can't say that. You know, and I've been working with women, and I am a woman. I've been working with women for, you know, 15, 20 years. But there's sometimes things that I'll say and I go, do you not think that's a bit sexist? And I'll go, actually, I haven't thought about it probably, you know. So they do point out, and they're not afraid to point out when they hear language or behaviours that they think are inappropriate. So let's, but I think that's coming forward.
That's so healthy, and it's actually such a wonderful thing to look at and look forward to in the future, a generation who is sensitized, you know. I think also, you know, you talk about, as a South African, my perspective, you know, because of our history, people will immediately assume things about you. But if you actually take the time to visit South Africa, you know, we've got 11 official languages. We've got people, I mean, they call it the melting pot of Africa. We have different races. I actually think, you know, South Africans in general are quite sensitized, but it's because it isn't a homogenous group. You are, you know, the organization I worked for had a 22,000 head count. And, you know, we have statistics. We've got a certain amount of people need to be from certain race groups. Very specific about this amount of people with disabilities. So that is a government imposed number that you need to attain, and they work actively to attain it. But if you're working in that kind of environment, you don't have this homogenous opinion on everything. You do need to be respectful of other people's cultures. You know, so I think, to me, it's a great blessing to have worked in organizations like that, had an upbringing and a schooling where this was built in. It wasn't anything special. It wasn't something we were trying to encourage. It was there. So you learned by experiencing it. So for me, I think sometimes it is quite a challenge. People, as soon as they hear you're from South Africa, they also have an idea about you and what you're about without knowing what you've experienced in your career or what it's really like here. You know, just seeing what's on the media internationally, you know, it's always bad news, and it's always, you know, the worst of the worst. So I think, again, there's an impact from the media sources you take in, the company you keep. There's so many factors, you know. So as an assistant, if you look at these factors, how can I make sure that I'm getting more diverse inputs? How, if I'm finding myself in this very homogenous group, how do I make sure that I'm getting those interactions, and if it's not in my company structure?
Yeah, and you know, just interesting what you were saying there about, you know, being from South Africa and, you know, people making opinions. I mean, that's attribution bias. We're talking about bias. You know, they're attributing certain things to you just because of your accent or where you come from. And, you know, in terms of creating that diversity around you, I mean, I know that, you know, this is a network. We're speaking to a network of people right now. You know, joining the networks, you know, the staff networks in your organization is one of the greatest things that you can do. It's so powerful. And not just joining, oh, I'm a woman, I'll join the women's network, but actually we need champions and allies across all of the different networks. And particularly people that wouldn't necessarily identify, you know, with the traits of that network, because actually, you know, I'm really interested, teach me, tell me more. And the other great thing as well, and this definitely happened with me when it came to working as a PA. You know, we as a group, myself, my boss, and a few others, set up the women's network at the department that we were working in. And in order to do that, we kind of, it fell to me as a PA. They were like, "Can you set up the women's network?" And I was like, "What is a women's network?" So I started Googling and then found out there was this other organization that just won an award. So we went, "Can you help us? You know, how do we do this?" So then there was a connection made with that other organization. Another senior leader met another senior leader. You know, and the more that you are involved in the networks, the more you're getting access to possibly very senior people that aren't necessarily, you know, within your you know, structure. Yeah, exactly. And you also have an opportunity to get your voice heard. There's a you know, you can be amplified much quicker within the networks. And I think it's incredibly powerful. You build out greater friendships, and also you get an opportunity to flex your skills and your own competencies and to build them that way, and to talk about it and shout about it. I mean, some of it we do have to take ownership and say, I am now going to talk about this. I'm going to blog about it, or I'm going to, you know, put it in the staff newsletter, or ask a question of how inclusive do we feel that we are as an organization, and start that conversation and be the leader of the conversation.
You made an incredibly important point. It is the awareness. I think what scares me is that a lot of people they haven't even taken the first step towards awareness. And I think that's why the unconscious bias training matters. That you make assumptions, but you haven't questioned those assumptions at all.
Absolutely. Yes, we have to, everything starts with yourself. All awareness, all development has to start with yourself. And it's taking that step back and just saying, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that by not including those people, or, you know, really focusing on this, that I'm actually excluding people. And I don't want to be that. You know, many people, they say, I don't think I'm biased. I'm a lovely person, but actually some of the behaviors that we're demonstrating just make people feel that they're not included. And you know, certainly it's not just, you know, as I said, we talk about inclusion, we talk about inclusive leaders, and even being an inclusive leader without formal authority. You don't necessarily have to be a leader. But actually, what does that look like? We talk about the leader's shadow, or, you know, an inclusion shadow. When you walk away, the words that you use, how you show up, the people you pay attention to, that all casts a shadow. So, you know, you are responsible for that, and actually thinking about, you know, what is the impact that I'm making, and can I make a positive impact for others, not just for myself. And we do a lot of work on crucial conversations, you know, the language that we use, the way that we help people to grow rather than shut them down. And even, you know, the type of presentations that we're making, thinking about how inclusive are we being, and what little things can we be saying in those presentations that help people to understand that we're focusing on inclusion.
Do you know, it's so ironic having this conversation, and touching upon something you just said. I had to put out some, they're not awkward posts to me, but they were awkward for other people to read. So in the UK PA industry, obviously we've got our own conferences, awards, events, networks. It's not just EPAA, there's loads of stuff out there. And a couple of assistants last year, we ran some focus groups at EPAA, and they were basically, some of the feedback and the threads that were coming off the back of those were, this industry isn't inclusive at all. And I was like, yeah. And then I kind of drilled down into the detail with these people, and they were saying, so in order for me to speak on a conference program or be on a PA panel at a PA conference, I have to be a white middle-aged woman of that population. If I go and enter a PA awards in this country, I'm going to be judged by a white middle-aged woman. And that's because it's largely the demographic in the UK. And I'm not saying that's the PA industry world over, but it is what's happening in the UK. And it hadn't even, I started to raise it in our closed Facebook group and on various social media posts and conversations with some of the network leaders. And I think that one of the most frightening aspects were that it was completely shocking to them. So some of them got really defensive with me, like, Vic, you're attacking us. I'm not attacking you, but imagine you are a Black millennial assistant trying to go for an award or has something to say and wants to be on a PA panel, and this is what you're presented with.
And
so, you know, we've got
presented with.
Yeah, and you've got to, you know, see that change. And because some of the network leaders said, well, people don't put themselves forward for awards, they've got to physically ask us. And I said, well, actually, no, they don't. I physically go out to people from different backgrounds, be on my panels, be on this podcast with Anel and I, come and be on our judging panel. We've just been through a whole massive board recruitment process with EPAA. And we couldn't have been any stronger on the, if you're under a protected characteristic, honestly, we are really super open to applying, and we're not doing it for the sake. We actually genuinely do believe if we've got a diverse board, then we're going to operate better as an association. But I do feel sometimes this profession is its own worst enemy. The fact that still most of it hasn't woken up to the lack of diversity and our own biases just on our own events and awards and magazine articles and the imagery out there. And most of the imagery is still quite dated, even, you know, on e-shops and social media posts and things like that. It's a little bit frightening, but it's been a big thing.
I think, Vic, you highlight the unconscious part of the bias. When it is raised, when somebody says, have you looked at this? It is the unconscious part that's at play here. We don't realize that it's happening until somebody holds the mirror up. And again, maybe just the awareness around what images are we using? What panels are we constituting? Are we really, when we look at this panel, does this panel look like the profession? You know, I think these are important questions.
Definitely for today. And I mean, we did the, Mary, you'll probably remember this, but EPAA did the first campaign for male assistants worldwide. And I got a lot of flack for that, a lot. But I stood firm on it because I believed that 96%, as it now is, female to 4% male in the UK is completely unacceptable. So we have to do more. And that's why we created the Not Just a Girl's Job campaign. But oh my goodness, some people are up in arms in our industry, but someone had to do it.
But they're up in arms, though. They're talking about it, you know.
Yeah.
It's that whole thing about, you know, is there any bad press? But, you know, they're talking about it. And, you know, it takes individuals like yourselves to start to flush out the biases, to start to say, do you know what? Yeah, okay, you might be moaning that we're now giving these jobs that were traditionally for women to men, and then that means that we're going to have less jobs for the girls. I mean, we have to have allies. If we're not inclusive, if we don't make inclusion a red thread through everything that we do, then, you know, we're not really supporting ourselves. We're not supporting the message that we're all giving out, you know, and particularly if you're thinking about women as well and about, you know, what we stand for, what we want, what our rights are. Actually, we need the allies. We need to be inclusive. We need to be role modeling inclusive behaviours.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think kind of going into what I wanted to finish our conversation with, which is quite a broad topic, but there's two bits to it. There's the fact that, I mean, your kind of take on leadership as it now stands. I mean, the work you do and how it underpins executive teams and leadership teams, it's not going anywhere, is it? Although, because a lot of people do think, oh, we've fixed everything, especially in the UK. I don't know about SA, but they're like, yeah, we're fine. We've had some training. That's all good. And then the other side of leadership is that I'm sure you both noticed that we've seen an increasingly number of senior, very high profile senior female leaders come out of their roles recently. And it seems to be becoming a bit of a trend. Some of them have cited burnout, wanting their lives back, and the toxicity around being a female leader, whether that's in politics or business or, you know, public sector. So I just wanted to kind of get your general thoughts on those two parts, Mary.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually talking about this yesterday with one of our neighbours who also works in learning development. We got into this conversation that, you know, there's, at the moment, yes, there's people leaving organisations, all that talent, all the years of experience just walking out the door. There's a real difficulty in also attracting people, skilled people to jobs as well. And the whole thing really comes down to human-centered leadership, which is what some of the best organisations in the globe are doing, is actually, if we support the people that are working for us and give them what they need in order to be successful, and we tell the new people coming in, come in, tell us what your needs are, we are more than likely to have the talent remain, because this is what's happening. And also, as you know, sort of younger generations of people do not have the loyalty that maybe our generation did. You know, there are no jobs for life. And I even tell the kids, it's like, you know, the job that you might have doesn't exist at the moment, potentially. So they know this. And also, you know, because of the pandemic, you know, what's to stop anyone going, you know what, sod this, I'm just going to go and join a tech startup and live on the beach in Bali because I can. So it really has to come back down to that. It's not just the work, it's the people, and how do you make people feel safe and supported within the workplace. And that's constant, because everything's changing constantly. It's not a one-stop shop. It's not a tick box. It's actually, tomorrow things can change again. I mean, look at what's happened in the last couple of years even. We never thought what would be happening with Ukraine and Russia, and, you know, after the pandemic. Who could have predicted that?
Definitely. And now just touching upon SA, how is the whole kind of women in leadership? I mean, is it a big debate over there?
Vic, you know, on our end, we have seen multiple very, very senior positions being filled at traditionally very male-dominated environments. There's been an appointment at Anglo Gold, you know, mining industry, very, very senior position. A woman's taken that job. What is sad to me is that that's still newsworthy. I wish it wasn't, you know. We've had a couple of appointments recently that have, you know, made the headlines. I do wish that we could get to a point where this wasn't a discussion, where, you know, the fact that she's female is not part of the headline. You know, it's just this person was appointed. I think it is changing. You know, I saw this in my own career, where we had a very, very talented group of female leaders in EXCO. We had one specific character move into that group, and we saw them all fall like dominoes, where everyone just got out, and it was a huge loss of talent at a very specific junction. We could all point back and say, this is when it happened, this is how it started happening. But just that erosion, you know, having had that group together, working well with the rest of EXCO, seeing that one person come in and seeing that churn of talent, you know, and they all went on to have massively successful careers with different companies, but the loss to the initial company of that skill set and how well everyone was working together. I often look back at that and say, you know, you had that talent on board. What is it going to cost you to get the same amount of talent? You know, what is that recruitment of that, using a headhunter, getting that person back on board? What does that cost the company? And what does it tell the rest of the organization when all the female leaders leave in a 12-month period, where all of a sudden you had this very representative organogram, and flash forward 12 months and that organogram becomes very homogenous again? What does that tell people when they look at that? How welcome am I as a woman in this organization? So it's that kind of thing where we are seeing change. I think it is still very much on the radar here, like it is everywhere else. I just wish it would become the status quo, where we don't have to talk about this, where we're at a good place and we can, you know, we're aware that we have to be representative. So I think that is basically the state of play on our end at the moment. But yes, we also, you know, I say South Africa is like 6 to 12 months behind the rest of the world. So we can see things coming, you know, it's just, are we paying attention and are we implementing?
That's a good point. I tend to think the UK is quite behind on a number of issues and areas of late. But Mary, we always end this kind of these podcast interviews with something, either a lesson you've learned during your career, whether that was the assistant part or your acting part, and any kind of golden nugget you want to throw out there to assistants who are not feeling too great at the moment in terms of their PA mojo, as I often call it.
Yeah, I think it's, I said it earlier, I mean, a lot of it is, you know, people are going to get in your way in life, you know, don't be one of them. That was something that was told to me, and I thought, God, yeah, I often have been said, oh no, I'm too scared to do this, or, you know, what's a bit of a risk, what will people think of me? You know, often, well, the other thing that I say as well is people don't necessarily remember what you say, but they will remember how you feel and or how you made them feel. So it's also thinking about if I'm feeling unconfident, if I don't feel as though I'm, you know, the output that I'm giving is enough, it's actually, how can you add value? How can you add value to another person? How can you make that other person feel good? How can you elevate them? How can you offer some assistance and help with that person? Because the more that you're seeing other people grow, the more that you will grow yourself. Also, you start to become that trusted advisor. More people want to hang out with you. They want to be around you because you're supporting them and helping them develop. And it might just be a few questions that you're asking them in a coaching style to sort of help them to start to unlock their own potential. That is always the place that I would start when you're feeling a bit flat, is actually, how can I help others? And I know that, you know, both of you, that's, you know, it's the life blood that goes through both of you. But sometimes we just forget that actually enabling other people enables ourselves.
Mary, something I'm going to take away from this afternoon's discussion that you said is show up for yourself. You know, that's a little note I'm going to be sticking on my mirror to look at in the morning, because I do think as assistants, we often pour from very empty cups. And that really struck a chord with me today. So thank you for that one.
There were tons of nuggets in this interview. I was jotting some of it down. I was trying to look like I'm not jotting it down, but I was. lots and lots. And I think actually a number of assistants will be a bit clearer now on where they can provide greater executive support in the areas that you teach and train on, in terms of helping this really get rolled out and embedded in organisations, right, you know, at the crux of it all. Because I do, having worked in the diversity and inclusion area myself as an EA and spent much of my career championing it, I do think it's still a big tick box exercise for some of the larger organisations, certainly. And it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen over the next 10 years. And of course, you've got more millennial CEOs coming in and what have you. So it'll be some really interesting dynamics and changes, I think. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been great. I can't believe that's been an hour. It's been over an hour.
I know.
Brilliant. It was so good chatting to you, and we really appreciate your insights. And we know that our watchers and listeners are going to enjoy it too.
Fab. Well, thank you very much. Have a lovely, lovely day.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Assistant Lab. If you enjoyed this content, you know what you need to do. Feel free to share it and help us grow our subscriber base.
Join us again next time. And until then, keep experimenting, innovating, and improving your skill set.